I realized that so much of the kind of typical financial advice that you see and the things that people take for granted are massively out of date. I feel like so much advice that you see is amazing if you did it in your 20s. But if you didn't do it in your 20s and you can't go back in time, what are you going to do? I am a property investor. My business is around investing in property. I talk about it on a podcast every week, but I choose to rent my own home, which is super weird.
Bienvenue sur Les Investisseurs 4.0, le podcast qui explore les stratégies et les méthodes pour développer son patrimoine immobilier quand on a 40 ans, un job à plein temps et une vie de famille trépidante. À force d'écouter les mêmes médias traditionnels, de regarder les mêmes vidéos sur la gestion de l'argent, on finit par prendre pour argent comptant des théories qui ne sont pas forcément vraies en réalité. Le monde financier dans lequel on vit change, il change à une très grande vitesse, il s'est passé beaucoup de choses sur les dernières années, sans que nos théories sur la gestion de l'argent n'aient vraiment beaucoup évolué. Achète ta résidence principale, utilise les intérêts composés, méfie-toi de l'inflation, ne mets pas tous tes œufs dans le même panier et diversifie au maximum. Et si ces conseils à vie n'étaient plus vraiment, voire plus du tout adaptés au monde dans lequel on vit aujourd'hui? C'est l'avis de Rob Dix, notre invité du jour, l'auteur des 7 mythes autour de l'argent qui vient tout juste de paraître. Rob est un investisseur immobilier chevronné, auteur de plusieurs livres sur le sujet. Il partage depuis 11 ans ses connaissances sur un podcast, le Property Podcast, qui reste le numéro 1 dans le secteur de l'investissement immobilier au Royaume-Uni. Je te conseille d'ailleurs vraiment de suivre ce podcast que j'adore. J'ai beaucoup d'admiration pour cet homme et c'est un honneur pour moi de le recevoir sur le podcast. Au cours de l'épisode, on va s'interroger sur certains de ces mythes autour de l'argent qui ont la dent dure. Faut-il acheter sa résidence principale ou la louer? L'inflation est-elle une bonne ou une mauvaise chose pour l'investisseur immobilier? Les investissements comportent-ils toujours des risques et faut-il les éviter? La diversification et les intérêts composés sont-ils ces outils indispensables dont l'investisseur a toujours besoin pour créer du patrimoine de façon durable? En fin d'épisode, Rob partage aussi le modèle économique qu'il donne à son média, le premier podcast au UK sur l'immobilier, et les synergies qu'il y trouve avec son business immobilier réel. Et il partage aussi 2 ressources précieuses pour comprendre les phénomènes macroéconomiques d'une part et pour transformer ta façon de penser à l'argent d'autre part. Tous ces liens sont évidemment dans ma newsletter. Je t'invite à t'abonner pour la recevoir chaque semaine gratuitement sur le lien investisseur avec un s40.com/nl. Allez, sur ce, on part à l'attaque de ces idées dures qu'on se fait au sujet de l'argent avec Rob. C'est parti. Hi Rob, welcome to Investors 4.0.
Thank you for having me. I like you anglicized the title for me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I figured it'd be tough for you to, the audience to understand. So yeah, essentially that's what it is, Investors and 4.0, which is kind of for, originally I've put the title of the podcast for, since when I went to, I turned 40, I had my kids, and I was at the same time really, really focused in building wealth and investing, in fact. So I was wondering how under these circumstances, can I actually build my net worth without just waiting for my banker to say, in 20 years, you see, you're going to, increase your, you repay your mortgage and you will have this asset. So it's pretty much in line with, I guess, with a lot of what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
Could you maybe just, I'm just curious to describe, and also for the audience to know a little bit more about you. Tell us how you came about this financial independence, financial freedom, this idea of actually building portfolio, building assets to become maybe freer in terms of getting some financial security. How that world kind of collided with your path.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And there's no neat, satisfying answer, except I think the drive for me was probably something that a lot of people will be able to relate to, which is just not wanting to have a job, not wanting to be told what to do. I think not being able to take instruction very well is probably underlies a core part of everything that I've ever done. So I worked, the only real job I've ever had is in the music industry, and I wouldn't really count that as a real job. But it's a great way to spend your 20s. And then when I got to the end of that, I think I left that when I was about 28 or so. My wife and I took a break, and we went and did the digital nomad thing, except it didn't really have that name at the time, and we didn't know we were doing it. We just planned to go and live in New York for 6 months because we both really loved it. So we're like, let's take a break, figure out what we're going to do. and then we'll come back to London and do whatever the thing is. So I have no idea. Just I was up for a career change. But it's while we were out there that we came across digital nomads. And actually, we don't have to come back to London. We don't have to have a normal job. We can just do whatever. And then through a long and confusing chain of coincidences, that ended up to me going via freelancing to getting into property. I already had a couple of real estate investments, but I started taking it more seriously. Ended up creating a podcast about it, which led to creating a business about it, and that became like my new kind of day job, I suppose. But away from property, I'd also been interested in investing more broadly. I'd like read all the classic kind of stock market books and everything else, and just wanted to, I don't know, I guess I just dabbled and just tried a bit of everything, like sort of being in Bitcoin from the early days, sadly not heavily enough, and just trying loads of different stuff. And over time, that kind of, I found that property was a really good springboard, because it's really, really simple to understand. As an investment, it's about as straightforward as it gets. But then from that, I got into kind of, okay, well, what makes a good property investment? How does that compare to other types of investment? How does the macro economy and everything like that, and interest rates and inflation, how does that all play into the investments that you make? So from that kind of very simple thing of like, I want to buy somewhere and have some rental income, it ended up leading to all this just getting me obsessed with the whole area, really.
Yeah, it seems as well as you're describing your path as well, that because I've been reading your book Price of Money as well, that when you wrote that book, you kind of really put into paper all of the understanding that you've gotten from on the financials, the financial world in general, and not necessarily the property world, which you knew very well, but then kind of moved from it to more the financial markets, if you will. My question as well, because in that book, you kind of point to why we should care really about what's happening as investors. And what would you say has changed in the economy? I mean, since then, maybe since you wrote the book until now, kind of to draw the point as to why it's important that we as investors continue to care now about what's going on.
Yeah, I think understanding the nuts and bolts of how the economy works, how central banks work, all that kind of thing was something that most people don't do. I think most people just kind of put it in the too boring box or too abstract or whatever. But then the more I came to learn about it, and it was COVID that was the wake up call for me, when suddenly like all this new money appeared out of nowhere. What is going on? So that's what kind of led me to do all the research and figure it out, and write the book to try to simplify it for other people. But it was through doing that I came to realize that all of this, it's so important for all the investments we make, and understanding, for example, that we're absolutely locked into more and more government debt, government spending, government borrowing. That we are locked into that. That is not going to change. There has to be inflation. There has to be higher inflation than we've become used to. It cannot be any other way. Once you understand that fundamentally changes how you think about the investments you make. And it got me thinking about how, like, when you're thinking about real estate, for me at this point, it's not even about the asset anymore. It's about the debt. It's about the fact that you've got you can borrow in the UK, at least, it varies in different places. You can borrow at a fixed rate. You can just pay off the interest and nothing else and keep that going forever. And you've got an asset which is guaranteed to keep going up in value over the long term, purely because of inflation. Same with your income stream, same with everything else. So it becomes about the ability to use debt in that way, in the context of what we believe about the economy, from understanding how it all works. They just completely transformed it for me. And then over the last couple of years since I wrote that book, the big thing, of course, has been interest rates not being zero anymore and going back to a more normal level, and doing so very quickly. So again, that a lot of the, so when I came to writing my new book, I realized that so much of the kind of typical financial advice that you see and the things that people take for granted are massively out of date. They're either 100 years old from before like the US central bank even existed, and the world's changed quite a lot since then, or even from like 20 years ago. The world is just fundamentally different. And so again, I think it's not everyone has to become a super geek about this stuff, but just understanding some of it can help you to frame the decisions that you make.
Because, I mean, one could argue that, things are going back to normal, rates are going back down. The government debt has always been there, at least for people, who are already, since we're already in an adult life, but not necessarily too old to remember, what it was before 1971. Things are going to be going forever, and it's okay for governments to hold their debt, and there's not, all these people are doomsayers and etc. How do you think that this kind of thinking, or rather, would you really see still a risk that there is something more brutal, more more fundamental as a shift that could actually happen in our lifetimes? Or you think that it's just, okay, inflation is there, it's eating our savings away anyway, that we got to take care of, but nothing really too drastic or major is coming along?
Yeah, it's really hard to put a time frame on it, because I think it's highly it's highly likely that something will happen in our lifetimes, but the path that we're on is completely unsustainable. But things that are unsustainable can be sustained for much longer than you think. Things that are unsustainable can be sustained for far longer than you think. And this is something that Ray Dalio talks about a lot, which is sort of things go on for so long. Like you might get something which is normal for 50 years or 100 years, and it's been going on so long that everyone's forgotten how it was before and can't even imagine that things can be any different from how they are now. But it's just at the point when everyone thinks, like, okay, fine, this time it's different, it's going to go on forever. That's when suddenly something breaks. And so, like, yeah, the interest rates that we've got now are like 5-ish% or whatever. That is normal. What is not normal is to have such a monumental amount of debt. So if you go back to when interest rates were last like this, I don't have the figures, but government debts, personal debts, corporate debt, all of it was way, way, way lower. And of course, because you've had 15-ish years of rates being pretty much nothing, the rational thing to do when rates are close to nothing is to borrow more. So everyone has borrowed more, but now rates have suddenly adjusted upwards again. So at a government level, you've got, like, over time, as more and more fixed term debt ends up having to get refinanced at higher rates, ever more of tax revenues are going to go towards just paying off the debt, even if you're not borrowing anymore. But they have to borrow more because it's the only path. So there aren't really many ways out of this. The way out is to extend for as long as possible, try to use inflation to reduce the debt in real terms and keep it manageable. But the whole system, the more you dig, the deeper you go into it, the more it becomes clear that it's all just kept going by confidence and belief. And who can say when the point is going to come that everyone goes, hang on a minute, and the whole thing falls apart? At some point it will happen. And the somewhat unsatisfactory conclusion that I left at the end of The Price of Money was, like, at some point it's all going to break, but you can't afford to worry about it too much, because it could be another 30 years, it could be more. And so if you just, like, turn everything into cash or gold and bury it in your back garden, you could miss out on like 20 years of bull market. So you can't worry about it too much. And so then what I started doing with the next book is thinking a bit more practically about, well, like, what can you do with your money in a world that has these characteristics? So it is weird, because the whole world, at some point, it is going to fall apart, but we don't know when, we don't know what it's going to look like, and there's nothing we can do about it. So you might as well just carry on and do the best you can regardless.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What's fascinating is indeed that, the methods of yesterday could actually not be, applied to today's situation. And what could some people find as a remedy to doomsday could actually be completely misplaced. For example, I guess if you're just, hoarding cash and just using your cash in your account, with no remuneration or any kind, you're thinking that at least I have asset, which is only cash. Now I'm fine. It's a completely, I guess, misconceptions. Whereas, so that's why I think it's good to tackle a little bit of those myths that you're talking in your book, upcoming book, which kind of reverses a little bit kind of the thoughts that we had about how it is to protect our cash. And one of it is obviously savings. And maybe to that level, I mean, what to that problem, what is your or what are the solutions that you think are most efficient?
Well, saving at the moment, as we're recording this, saving is actually rewarding for once. Again, in the UK, at least, you can get a rate of interest that's higher than the rate of inflation. But for various reasons that I go into in the book, I think that's unlikely to be the case over the majority of the next, say, 10, 20 years, in the same way as it hasn't been true for the majority of the last 15 years. You end up with the interest that you earn in the bank is more than eroded by the rate of inflation, and inflation over the last few years has obviously been pretty severe. And at the moment, saving is currently rewarding to a degree, but it's one of those topics that I feel gets overdone in personal finance, because it's very easy to give very templated advice about how to save, and you can come up with rules that anyone can follow and will work for everyone. And that's great. But I think the problem is, because that's a simple bit, people overfixate on saving. Like, you have to save. You can't invest until you've saved something first. But because the business of saving seems easy and kind of safe, and the business of investing seems complicated and scary, a lot of the focus comes on saving. And the point that I make is, if you take there are three things that you can basically control when it comes to your finances, which are saving, earning, and investing. They're the three broad categories. And saving is the least powerful of those, because you can earn an infinite amount. In practice, you can't, but in theory, you can. There's no ceiling on it. Investing is great, but there is still a ceiling. Like, you can't, without taking really crazy bets on going all in on a particular stock or whatever, you can't force the rate of return to be any higher than it is. So there are constraints, but it's still great because over time, compounding, et cetera, et cetera. But saving, it's the least powerful, because you can't cut back to zero. From wherever you are now, you can cut something, but you can't cut 100% of your spending. And so if the time you spend trying to increase your savings rate from 20% to 25% or even 30%, your time will be so much better invested if you focused on either investing or, probably for many people, on earning, because there's just far more upside there. So where I lay this out in the book, I kind of explain why all this is the case, and then come to a point of what I call conscious spending. So it's optimizing your spending. So you are spending on what actually improves your life today, what makes you happy. It's not living like a monk. It's not really depriving yourself too much today for some kind of distant future. It's optimizing your spending today. And then once you've done that, putting it on autopilot, having a system where that just happens, and then not thinking about it again. Because any time that you spend on going like, oh, well, should I have like one coffee out per week or two coffees out per week? It just doesn't make any difference. The same amount of mental effort invested anywhere else would make so much of a higher impact. So yes, it's something that you have to put in place. But I think once you've got the basics in place, stop obsessing about it and go and focus on something with a higher ROI.
Yeah, no, so that's because you include in it and in the reasoning, the time and energy you put as an asset in a way. We all have those assets to the equation, and in that way, I guess if you focus your time and energy on something where it's just about what to do with the amount that you get, which if you don't vary that amount, you really limited control over it. That's really interesting. And in that same vein, because there is always a debate in France, at least, and probably in the UK, about talking about where put your investment to control inflation. One of the big debate is whether you should own your home or rent it, which sometimes comes with that debate as well. Saying some people, homeowners saying, but at least I have my capital, which is not going to depreciate. I'm protected against inflation, etc. You have a slightly different take on that, home owning versus renting, or do you have a definite answer to that problem?
Yeah, well, I'm coming at it from a weird angle, because I am a property investor. My business is around investing in property. I talk about it on a podcast every week, but I choose to rent my own home, which is super weird. But I'm not saying that means that everyone should rent their home. What I'm saying is that it should be a decision to make. Whereas I think, especially in the UK, but I know in lots of other places as well, it's just taken for granted that owning your home is the best thing to do. And it's almost like if you don't own your own home, you don't have a chance. You're screwed financially. So I'm just saying that it's actually a decision that you should make, because it's not right for everyone all the time. So the example of this is, I know so many people who in their, say, mid-20s, they bought a one-bedroom apartment because it's what they could afford. And then they met a partner, they had kids, and now they need somewhere bigger to live, but they can't sell their first home. So they've ended up having to go and rent somewhere else. It's also, if you own a home, it makes it far harder to move for work and take opportunities elsewhere. So basically, it's great when you're settled, but if you don't know what you're going to be doing, what home you're going to want or need for the next 5 to 10 years, it just might not be the right thing to do, because there are so many upfront costs that come with buying a home that you need to spread those costs out over quite a few years for it to actually make sense. So there will come a time for most people when it becomes the right thing to do, but it comes down to a balance between sort of like safety and certainty versus flexibility. And even though I do have a family, I'm not totally settled on the fact that I want to be in London in 5 years' time. I don't know. So it makes more sense for me to be renting. So it's really just the case that it is a debate that people need to have. And there's nothing magical about your own home. In a way, your own home is the worst investment that you can have, because you can't do anything with it unless you disrupt your life by moving. So you might get to a point where you have £1 million, €1 million of equity in your property. That's amazing. You can't do anything with it unless you move. And if you want to move, great. But if you don't, then it's really unhelpful. So you could achieve the same thing by taking the same amount of money that you would have invested into buying your own home and buy a rental property instead. You have the same exposure to the property market. You have all the same dynamics at play, but it's just that you don't happen to live there. So what I often say is, like, you've got to have assets. It's not between having assets and not having assets. You've got to have assets, but you don't have to live in your assets.
Right. So really, as an investment vehicle, using the leverage, the mortgage that you can do to invest and build your portfolio, which is probably more, a more adequate way to use property as an asset rather than living it and not, strapping your cash in it, basically.
Yeah, and if you get, like, it's in the UK at least, like, owning your own home is very tax advantaged, and you can borrow more as if you're buying your own home than you can as an investor. You can benefit from more of that leverage effect. So if you do want to own a home, then that's fantastic. It can be a really it can work out really well for you. But I think, like, life and investments are two different things. And I don't think you should do something financially optimal if it compromises your lifestyle and what you actually want. You need to balance the two. So if you want to own a home, then great. But if you don't want to, even if it's financially the better thing to do, I still don't think you should be doing it.
If tackling the inflation is your main priority, would you still see, like, house, like property, maybe as an investment, as the best hedge against it? Or
Yeah, well, the great thing about property as an investment is you can actually harness inflation to your advantage rather than just protecting yourself from it. And that's because of the leverage aspect. So if you want to at least have something that holds its value in relation to inflation, then over the very long term, there's gold. Of course, that can do anything from year to year, but over the extremely long term, it holds its value. If you can get cash where you can earn enough interest to make up for the inflation that you're losing, then that's great, because it gives you loads of flexibility. Obviously, there's the stock market. There's loads of stuff you can do, but it's only really when you're using leverage can you actually use inflation to your advantage. So, like, the really simple example is that say your property goes up in value by 2% over the course of a year, and that's not because property's doing anything magical. It's because everything's gone up by 2% over the course of a year. And that's just inflation. But if you only put in a quarter of the money, then the value of your investment, your little piece of it, has gone up by 8% because it's 2% times 4. And then imagine that you end up going into a period of high inflation, which is something that governments want to a point. No one wants the double digits that we had a couple of years ago. But if you ended up with inflation at like 4%, so it's kind of like high enough to control your debts, but not so high that people start complaining, that's pretty good. Well, multiply by that by 4, and you've got 16% return on your investment. So that's the incredible thing about leverage. And yes, there are risks and downsides and all this kind of stuff, and you've got to be sensible about it. But that is the core fact of it. And you could apply leverage to a portfolio of stock market investments, but it's a very bad idea for lots of reasons for most people. So which just sort of leaves you with that. That's one of the reasons why I think property is so powerful, because you can actually use inflation rather than being harmed by it.
Interesting. I thought the argument was really more about the fact that the rental payments were adjusted to inflation itself, but I didn't see the other argument coming, which is quite powerful as well. Yeah, about leverage.
The rent is great as well. That's the other thing. So your rental income stream is pretty much going to keep up with inflation. Again, not every year, but over time as well, which is pretty amazing. So again, if you're borrowing, and this is the good thing as well about how borrowing rates have actually gone up, because so in the UK, you could borrow for a while at about 2%, and you knew that wasn't going to last forever. But when was it going to stop? You didn't know. Now you can borrow at about 5%, and you can be reasonably confident that it's not going to go significantly above that level. So if you borrow an amount of money at 5% and you assume you're going to be paying out 5% interest or thereabouts, maybe even a bit lower, but then on the rental side, you know that your rental income is going to go up every year. So your returns just get better and better and better over time.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, I'm also a property investor, and I believe in it forcefully. But obviously, that's a very strong argument there. I wanted to touch on, as we move maybe as an investor more into an aggressive lens, in order to not only just make sure we are protected for inflation, but kind of building wealth. And you're saying, earning is the most important component of, building wealth. One of the aspects, I guess, that people, have, and I think you argue for it on your book, is the fact that you have to take some risk in order to invest and actually create value. The risk taking is difficult to assess for each individual. I guess is different. People have different aversion to risk. How would you say how do you set the right risk profile for each individual as an investor? Where do you think you can see that, okay, I'm taking too much risk, or I'm taking too little risk, which can also be a risk, and for any type of assets,
It's really hard. It's really hard, and for that reason, because it's hard, it tends to get ignored a lot of the time. So, in the book, I talk about something that was popularized by someone called Ashwin Chabra, which is a really interesting concept where anyone who's investing in anything always has 3 motivations. They want to protect themselves, protect their lifestyle, make sure they don't end up on the street. They want to maintain their lifestyle while working less over time, but they also want to improve. Everyone wants to end up relatively better off than their neighbors or whatever. And everyone has all 3 of those motivations in different proportions. But the one to improve tends to get ignored by financial advisors, by sort of mainstream books, because it's so personal. So again, you can give people really hard and fast rules about saving, and you can talk about investing, like making broad-based investments in index funds in the stock market, or the 60-40 stocks bonds portfolio, whatever it is. You can come up with rules and you can show that over time it will work. But when it comes to trying to make improvements, that's all you. Like, there's nothing you can do for the average person to just go in and beat the market like that. It's always going to be some application of your own time, your own skill, your own effort, your own something, which makes it super hard to actually say what any given person should do. But the only certainty is that if you do want to improve, yes, you want to maintain, yes, you want to protect, but you do want to improve, then you need to be doing it. And so then it comes down to, how do you balance those 3 motivations? How much do you want to go for it and make a big leap upwards versus not fall backwards? And that's going to be different for every person. So, or people who, everyone kind of in the mainstream makes fun of like kids in their early 20s, like betting on like meme coins and stuff like that. But for them, it could actually be a rational thing to do because they don't have much to lose and they see what their prospects look like on the mainstream path and they don't look that great. So actually they're far more interested in making a big leap upwards, even knowing that maybe the chances of that are less likely. So they're trying to figure out how much risk you should be taking. I don't necessarily think about it in terms of how much risk you should be taking. I think about it in terms of like how much effort do you want to put in? Because really, you're always taking a risk, but it should be a calculated risk rather than just a punt. So whether it's starting a business or investing in property or investing in someone else's business, whatever it is, you should only be doing it if you're willing to put in the time and the effort and get to a point where it's a calculated risk to some extent. So if you have no desire to do that, then maybe you shouldn't be doing any of that at all. And you should just be focusing on earning more because that's something that really doesn't have any drawbacks to it. But if it is something you want to do, then it's really just looking at what's left over. Kind of like sort out your what do you need to protect yourself, which most people is home and an emergency fund. What do you want to have compounding away in broad-based kind of stock market type investments for 30 years? And whatever's left over is kind of what you've got to play with to go and do that active investments that can really move the needle.
Yeah, so it's hard, but I guess your approach is right in the way that, if you manage to create at least some kind of a buffer where you feel like, okay, if this or that happens, I can take it, absorb it with the buffer that I have. It enables me to actually take on the risk. And I know some people, for example, who investing in stock picking is their thing, and they like it, and they if they can afford to do it just because they have this mattress of rental coming on, a significant buffer where they establish, if 60%, 80% vacancy on my rentals, I'm still going to be able to cover all my costs, so I can still engage in that, a bit more risky, activity. But it's tough because you don't really know either. If you're going for the approach of, I'm going to do this for a year and see if it works. Sometimes it might take more than that. And if you include as well entrepreneurship, which I guess it's kind of like investing in a new asset class, it's an activity you put your time and energy on in order to boost your income. It's even harder to actually put an end to, okay, this experience is, worked or failed,
Definitely. And that's the tough thing about it. And because for any kind of investment that has a high potential payoff, it does take time to learn how to do that. It'd be weird if you could go in and be a great stock picker on day one with no experience. Like you can't be great at anything else without any experience. So yeah, it takes time. And figuring out entrepreneurship, like it normally takes people a good few years to really get going and figure it out. But it's the kind of the key theme that I keep coming back to throughout the book is like just taking control, taking ownership, because the more that you can have within your control or even believe is in your control, that gives you something you can work with. Whereas if you just believe it's all up to the performance of the markets or what a politician does or whether your boss wants to give you a raise or not, then you're just kind of mentally giving up the ability to do anything with it. And so I think you can direct it in different ways. You could direct it towards starting a business. You could direct it towards learning about investments. You can direct it towards increasing your earnings. But these are all things that you potentially have control over. And it might take time to go, okay, that one's not working. I want to try this instead. But at least it puts you on that path then to being able to do something about it.
And how much do you think the diversification or the interest compounding thing can help you get there in terms of, improving your net worth? There's a lot, obviously, of literature, at least here in France, a lot of, at least on the social media, thoughts about, the compounding machine is absolutely beautiful. You just DCA on an ETF, S&P 500 or MSCI World, and that seems to be like the avenue for all. So I just want to know, in that conversation, in that approach, how much these two things, diversification, diversifying your portfolio, and or putting in place a good interest compounding machine can help you.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So in the context of like the three motivations I laid out, like you want to protect yourself, you want to maintain your lifestyle, you want to improve your lifestyle. For me, those kind of, if you have like a well diversified collection of investments like stocks, bonds, bit of gold, bit of whatever, all that kind of thing, that is for me fits under like the maintain part, because it's not going to make you wildly rich unless you live for a really long time. So Warren Buffett has famously made like 95% of his wealth after he turned 60 or something. But that's because he's really old. Like he's had a hell of a long time for compounding to be doing its thing. And so eventually it will get you to that point. And that is great. I'm absolutely not looking down on that in any way. But I feel like so much advice that you see is amazing if you did it in your 20s. But if you didn't do it in your 20s and you can't go back in time, what are you going to do? So if you've got someone in your 40s who's sort of going and looking at this, it's like that might not get you to where you want to be. Like when you look at the compounding curve, which is really compelling, but it takes really like at least 20, really more like 30 years of compounding to really see the compounding effect kick off. So obviously, if you're putting in a certain amount every year, you're always seeing the benefit of that. That's great, but that's pretty linear. It's only after sort of like 30-ish years that you really see the returns on returns building up. And so it's the investment that's making money for you rather than your own contributions. So if you are doing something in your 30s that because you want to have something there for you in your 60s, that's awesome, like 100%. But if you want to make a real improvement to your lifestyle in less time than that, so you want to you either want to be able to quit your job, or you want to be able to have more flexibility, or you just want to be rich for whatever reason, you want to make a big leap, then it's not going to do it for you. So you need to be doing something else. And obviously, many people don't have that desire, or they don't want to take the risk or whatever, and that's fine. Compounding is amazing. But if you do want to make that big change, then I think it's important to recognize the limits of compounding.
And do you see a lot of investors who diversify too much or too soon on their path?
I think it's an area that people overthink a lot. Like people who, like some people have it like personal finance as a hobby, and I count myself among them. And we are weird people. Like it shouldn't be, for most people, it shouldn't be a hobby. But I think people like overthink like exactly which funds, or whether this fund or that fund has a different expense ratio or whatever. But for the most part, it just doesn't matter that much. Like if you've got 10% or 20% allocated to emerging markets, who knows? Like it's impossible to know in advance what's going to be the case. And so it's just not worth stressing out about too much. So it's a bit like saving for me. It's just like, get it on autopilot, recognize what it's going to do in the end, and then move on. So, but it all ultimately comes back to what you want. And so much in investing for me comes down to answering this question of what do you actually want, and what are you willing to forego, or what are you willing to risk or put up with or whatever in order to get there. But knowing what you want is the hardest question of all. It's really, really, really tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't give a good solution or a good orientation, whether if you don't have that data. If we take for example, two profiles, one being probably, closer to my audience, above 40 years old, probably, well-paid individuals who some don't really necessarily take a leap out of their job, but would like to kind of create the step up to their financial security, because as many, as we know, public pension is not going to be too much helpful. And then another profile, maybe earlier, like 20s on your 30s, when you have a job but you still have less money but more time. If those are fair profiles that you see regularly, what would you say the differences could be in the approach for those two type of profile?
Sure. So if we assume that for people in their 40s, let's assume that they want to make some kind of improvement. In many cases, it's the ability to retire early. So it might not be to like have multiple homes and private jets and stuff, but it's fine if it is. But a lot of the time it's just like, I don't want to be working in this job until I'm 65, 67, whatever it is. So for those people, I think you've got to do something. We've already said like saving alone won't get you there. Compound interest alone won't get you there fast enough. So you need to be doing something else. The thing is, as we've said, everyone is different. And so it's impossible to, like, everyone says, oh, this worked for me, so everyone should do this. But like, no, everyone's likes different things. And so I think recognizing that everyone's only got a certain amount of time to dedicate to this, like everyone's got jobs, families, like time is tight. You've got a certain number of hours per week to apply to something. And so I would always gravitate to whatever interests you the most, because if you're going to be spending hundreds of hours on this over time, which you are, it might as well be something that you enjoy. So for some people, that is entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship is amazing. And even if you just have a little mini side business, it can be incredible. So if you're making €1,000 a month from selling some kind of product or something, that's the equivalent of having €250,000 invested and earning you a 5% return. So saving up $250,000 is going to take you a really long time. But I'm not saying making 1,000 a month is trivial. It's not, but it's doable and it's really powerful. So if you are motivated in that direction, that's incredible. But it's not for everyone. So maybe it is looking at certain types of investment. Maybe it is like really deepening your knowledge of a particular sector, so you can like do sensible stock picking in that regard. It could be making angel investments. I don't know. It needs to be something that you're drawn towards, and you would ideally you'd enjoy doing it anyway, even if the financial rewards weren't there. But recognizing that it is going to take at least a few years for you to start seeing the results of that. So I've got thoughts on your other profile as well, but I've been talking for a long time. So maybe see if you want to react to that at all.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair assessment that, it's a security. You do something you like, so that even though even if you don't access or reach those financial rewards, you get the reward of having done something you enjoy. But it's true that once some have different time horizon ahead of them, and like say mid-40s, you're looking for 20 years before the official retirement. So you have 20 years, which is less than the 20 years old, which is probably 40. So I guess the approach would be different. You have this ability to take risk, which is a bit narrower as you are older. But I still think that you need to take on risk, because I think risk return, and in one might argue you might need to take more risk, because you need to get there if you haven't saved enough, quicker than the 20-year-old. So just these kind of things. I think about a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're completely right. Like when say you're in your 20s, then you do you've got all the options. And then it really comes down to this whole what do you want thing. Because if you do just want to do the very, very normal traditional path of like save into your pension, buy a house, do all this kind of thing, then because you've got time on your side, chances are it'll work out well for you. Like it's very hard to have good disciplined financial habits for 40 years and not end up in a pretty good place. So that route is completely open to you, but then so are all the others. So if you actually want more than that, or you want to get there faster, then these other options are there as well. But it's a choice at that point. Whereas if you are in your mid-40s and you've got you haven't started yet, effectively, you're just not even thinking about this kind of thing, then your options are a bit more limited. But I think it's one of those things where obviously things take time, but you can, if you start to really dedicate yourself to something, I think at first the progress seems really slow. And I've sort of said before, 3 years seems to be what comes up as the time for really people to start feel like they've sort of starting to figure it out. But then by the time you go from there to 5 years, the difference can be quite big. And then in 10 years, you could be looking back and go, whoa, like I'm on a completely different trajectory here. So it is possible to make, when we're talking about like making changes, not talking about like next week, but over the course of a decade, you can do a heck of a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the situation. That's why I guess I put on the example, but I'm hanging on the idea again that it's about focus, and the superpower that probably might have over younger generations is the ability to focus on something and be disciplined. Even more so since I became a parent. Like this moment, like, and I have for myself is so limited that I need to be doing something. In my brain knows it, and so it's just a matter of, I guess, we coming out a little bit from the just financial equation, but more to the, what you do with your time thing. And maybe that could be the superpower that makes the 40 plus years old succeed, even though he has less time ahead of him, is the ability to know what he wants, having seen other things, and being completely focused and on something.
Definitely, yeah. You've seen you understand more about what you've seen and what you want. Having that. Having kids has been great for me, because I was really worried before having kids in terms of like, what's this going to mean for my productivity? But in fact, it's actually made me far more efficient, because rather than spending every waking hour doing things that seemed important, I have to think really carefully about what is actually important. So end up spending far less time, because I can spend less time on it, but making that really count for a lot more and thinking things through more carefully before I commit to them.
Do you think that the ever more access we have now to financial products, even products based on any type of assets, underlying assets like property, in fact, tokenized assets, for example, just to cite one, and the financial education or information that is flowing through social media nowadays? And do you think all these things and the access to new products and this awareness of how to invest for the good or the bad, do you think it's actually helpful, or it is putting too much options to too many people who probably don't have the tools to get there?
That's a tricky one. It's kind of hard to look at people getting interested in finance and investing and stuff and say that's a bad thing, but in a way, I think it can be. And something I talk about in the book is all the kind of like the TikTok type financial advice you could get. It's all like based off the returns of the S&P 500 over the last however many years. And if this just happens at 10% a year and blah, blah, blah. It's like, you're never going to get 10% compounding returns without taking some risk. If you're going to diversify, then you're never going to get that. And by the time inflation's come out of it, you're never going to get it. And so I think because the tendency is always to create sound bites out of things, you end up losing quite a lot, which is important. And I just came across a Reddit thread this morning where it's like someone talking about how the US has been doing so well recently, so I've just taken everything out of the rest of the world and like put it into the US, because like, why wouldn't you? It's the best. It's like, just because something's been good in the past doesn't mean it's going to be in the future. And so there is a risk to not having this deeper understanding of it. And with the proliferation of financial products, of course, they all want to sell you something. And the more complicated things get, the more you feel like you need financial intermediaries who can sort of take their cut along the way. So there are all these dangers, but all in all, I'd still far rather have the world we have today, where all this information is available if you know what to do with it. But I think it needs to be based on a framework of understanding the basics, like how everything works, what you want, all these kind of fundamentals, and then you've got a better filter through which to put everything else that's out there.
How much has I know the book Die with Zero has kind of impacted you. How much do you play in your life, and like, is there an alternative way to what we've been discussing in terms of like, retiring early, or getting those fancy things with the money we've created or we would create?
I love Die with Zero as a book. It's my wife's favorite book I've ever read because it made me want to spend more. So I really have made major changes in my life as a result of reading it, because saving and being cautious and accumulating can become a pathology that you can just take it too far. And I think I was at danger of doing that, but then the book makes you question, well, what is the ultimate aim? If the ultimate aim is to have the best life that you can, then it's not to it's not to deny yourself too much today, because like there are certain experiences that you can only have at the age you are now. And so having twice as much money when you're 70 is going to be of no benefit whatsoever. And you're not going to want to spend all your time working and doing something you don't enjoy doing. And you're not even going to want to leave the biggest pile of money possible to your kids when you die, because it's really obvious when you think about it. I never have until I read the book. It's just like, what's the point of giving your kids some random amount of money at some random age based on whatever you happen to have at the time? Like if you are lucky enough to have a long life and your kids are in their 50s at the time, well, that money could have done them a lot more good when they were 30. And you should be giving them a defined amount of money for a defined reason when it's actually going to make a difference. So that's really shaped how I think about my own finances. And I've been thinking a lot more about how much do I actually, how much do I really need to be saving versus how much do I just have this mentality of like, the more, the safer. And so there comes a point where it's just like, yeah, I'd far rather have the experience now rather than potentially have more money in the future.
That's very interesting. No, really interesting. I think, do you calibrate your, let's say, the money that you envisage about having or building, calibrate on your lifetime then, and then kind of redistribute the resources to experience with you and your kids and your family, everybody around you in that way, without thinking, okay, what am I going to pass on and at what age?
Very much so. The view that I take is that what my job, as I see it, is to set up my kids as well as I possibly can. So like give them the best childhood possible, the best experiences, the best memories, the best education, the best opportunities I can. And then maybe if I can give them a little bit of a push along the way with a bit of capital for whatever it is, then fine. But if I've given them that start, they should be able to figure the rest out. And I don't think it's ultimately if you could set up your kids so they never had to work again, would you? I'm not sure I would. It tends not to make for a happy life, you know?
Yeah, no, I was talking to an entrepreneur as well who is just deliberately cutting all his wealth, cutting his kids just because he wanted them to obviously create something for themselves. And he said even it goes as far as to create conditions for boredom at home. And so that creativity comes out of it, and they need to be creative in order to just occupy themselves. So it's pretty much along the line with what you're describing.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to maybe wrap it up on the property front, maybe with the Property Hub and Property Podcast. A great podcast, by the way. I really love it, and thanks for showing the way with it, and very consistent. 10 years, right, of podcasting with it.
11 now, I think.
11 years, unbelievable. Pretty much, I mean, interested in understanding how the business has. I mean, what has been the business model with your podcast? And I kind of heard from a recent episode, you were talking about shifting that model a bit next year, moving away from maybe consultancy jobs that you were doing with it. Can you just touch a little bit on the idea of the podcast as it has been, and how it's kind of look like?
Yeah, the podcast has been amazing. So we were very lucky to be a first mover. Like if you were in the UK and you typed property into iTunes as it was back then, you had us or nothing. And so the bar wasn't very high. We didn't have to be that good to get listeners, which brought us a few years to figure out how to make the show a bit better. But as a result of being a first mover, we've been lucky to build a really great audience. The approach that we've taken to building the business has been very different to what a lot of other people have done. I give my co-founder complete credit for this because this was his vision, his idea. But his like, if you could just like take that 1% of the audience who fit a certain profile, which for us is like being kind of like cash rich but time poor. So people who are high earners, people who are expats, they don't live in the UK, they need someone to help them. Then we can create services, which in our case is probably consultancy and helping people access deals, build their portfolios. But just doing that for that like 1% of the audience, then that is enough to build a decent sized business on. So we don't have adverts on the podcast. We don't sell courses. We don't monetize 99% of our audience in any way, which is very unusual, but it's worked really well for us. And we've gone from, over time, we kind of went through an excitable phase of offering lots of services and doing lots of different things. But we've now kind of come back to just doing this core activity of just using our relationships to access really great discounted deals, and passing them on to investors and taking a fee in the middle. It's really simple, but it works.
So those are turnkey projects, right? You just finding the deals, managing it, etc., on behalf of your client.
Yeah, we don't even do the management anymore. We did have a management agency, but that was very hard work. So we sold that, and now we just refer to someone else instead. But yeah, now it's just finding the deals. So we've got relationships going back more than a decade with developers. And so if they're in a situation where, say, they've just got a big national developer, they've built a certain project and they might have 10 or 20 left at the end. They want to sell those quickly so they can get off to the next project. We can get those at, say, like an 8 to 10% discount. We can pass that discount on to our clients and make the whole process. Our team kind of does all the work around it. So it makes the whole process really hands off. So it's like, without having to go spend any time browsing listings, going viewing properties, making offers, doing any of that stuff, you can like just have it like that. And you've saved potentially £20,000 into the deal. So it's a pretty compelling offer for the right kind of person.
And those are new developments. So I imagine there's no issue or no bad surprises, like a fixer-upper kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's why we're really we are serving a niche, because there's a lot of people want to be hands-on. They want to do it themselves because they enjoy it, or they want to be doing the sort of project where they do fixer-uppers, they add value. That's part of their model, and that's a perfectly great way of doing things. It's just not our model. So we're really for people who just want something new or newish. It's not all new, but it's all to the extent that we know that it is what it is. It's high quality and it's optimized not just for making the most income today, but it's a blend of income and what we believe its growth potential is over time. So if you're looking over like a 10-year time frame, you might not be making the most income you possibly could this month, but it will get you to a really good place in the end by the time you've used the principle of leverage and everything else that we've talked about.
And do you have a fixed or floating rate mortgages in the UK for investing in property?
Unfortunately, the longest you can fix for is 5 years. So I wish we had the American model.
No, actually, yeah. And despite that and the rate hikes, there wasn't any bad surprises for your customers. They didn't necessarily lose money because of that.
It's really weird, I think, how well the property market has adjusted, how well all markets have adjusted to going from like such low rates, like suddenly like rebounding over the course of a year back to the rates that have been more normal. And it is strange that everything has been so resilient, but property has. And in the case of in the UK, rents have gone up dramatically over the last few years. So not in every case has the increase in rent made up for the increase in interest rate, but it's gone a long way to offsetting that effect. And of course, if you're making a purchase today, like I referred to earlier, you can feel more confident that the rate you're getting today is going to be achievable in the future. So if the numbers work today, it's just going to keep working even better in the future.
There's a shift, right? Did I misunderstand? A shift in the business model for the podcast next year, or can you say a few words about it, or is it still a top secret operations at this stage?
No, I don't think we're doing anything dramatic. I don't think we're doing anything dramatic. It's really just getting more focused and trying to perhaps grow a little bit more aggressively. So it's really. This kind of just sprung out of like the two of us doing it, and we built the team over time, and we've got distracted by all kinds of different things. But now we're trying to turn it from something that is turning it into a business that can really stand on its own without us. So rather than being a personal brand, it's like a proper business that we could step away from.
I see. Yeah, I understand the logic. And I mean, media and podcast, media and property, that's also something I'm really thinking a lot lately and trying to. And I think what you've found out in terms of your model is really perfect in a way that you don't necessarily sell the projects or bother the the listeners with an ad, but podcast gives you the credibility, authority to actually deliver and make people invest in the real world without just saying, selling some cheap product or anything. So in terms of brand awareness, and it's brilliant in a way that because you don't get convoluted or polluted by the get a quick buck with from sponsorship, which you would be making a lot of money giving them your downloads. What do you think is the future of media and property? Because I follow also Ryan Serhant, which you probably know, owning Manhattan on Netflix, and it's fascinating the way he's using social media to promote, high-end luxury properties, and I'm fascinated by that in a way, trying to understand what's the model there between having a media and selling property or working in property. If you've seen any trends lately, but.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think there is we've proved it can be done. Ryan Serhant has proved it can be done at a far bigger scale, but in terms of using these channels to build your own business rather than build someone else's, and this is something that Nathan Barry and from ConvertKit has been talking about a lot. This whole concept of using these. If you've got the ability. If you've got the kind of the creator mindset, you've got the ability to capture attention by providing something worthwhile, then monetizing that with your own business is ultimately going to be a lot more durable and a lot more profitable than someone else's. So they don't have to be exclusive. Like we don't really talk about our own service much on our podcast or on our YouTube channel. It's just like little subtle mentions. And so we could put ads in there and it wouldn't really dilute anything, but it's more just about focus. But I think using these channels to grow an actual business is harder because you need to have the ability or bring in the ability to do multiple things. You need to not just be able to create the content, capture the attention. You need to be able to run the business as well. And it's taken us 10 years to figure out how to run a business effectively. I think we finally got there, but it took a while. But if you can get there, then it's a much better place to be.
I'm fascinated. I'm struggling, to be honest. I started the podcast 4 years ago, but this route of going with the property buy and sell business for 2 years and the podcast. And I can see I'm slower because I'm trying both activities. And as you even say in the book, I got to focus on one thing. But I see you have also this profile of doing dual activities. And then I guess, the idea would be to have synergies, but they don't come about just immediately. So
yeah, and we lucked our way into the synergies, and we took a very long time to figure out the business part properly. But it's like I think if you had to pick anything, like the ability to having an audience that trusts you is so powerful. Like if you've got the ability to do that, and then everything else will come eventually. But that's the bit that so many people would just give anything to have. The people who are pouring money into advertising on other platforms, they would love to have their own platform. And so that's I think the hardest part and the most valuable part. Everything else, it will take time, but it'll come.
That's great. Well, thanks a lot, Rob. Before we finish here, do you have any good resources that you could point people to in terms of really what we've been discussing, obviously, and what helped you form all the views that you expressed here?
There's loads. So if I need to quickly plug my own stuff, and so I have to plug the property podcast. My new book is 7 Myths About Money, 7mythsaboutmoney.com. And in terms of other people's stuff, I think the book Die With Zero we talked about is incredible. I think in terms of we've touched a few times on this question of figuring out what you want. I think that's very, very powerful there. And if you want to get more into the nuts and bolts of how the economy works, how everything fits together, and where we're going, then there's someone called Lynn Alden, who I love her work. She's been a guest of loads of podcasts. She's got her own blog, which is great. She's got a monthly newsletter that I always read. She makes everything very clear, and she's also got most of the big calls right over the last few years when most people have been wrong. So if I had to choose just one thing to read when it comes to kind of thinking about the economy in the macro sense, that would be it.
Awesome. And where can people reach you if they want to pursue the conversations?
So if you go to robdix.com, then you can find me in social media and stuff from there.
Super active, super productive creator that, highly respect. So thank you again, Rob, for being here.
And thank you so much. It's been a really great conversation.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Si tu as aimé cette conversation, tu vas adorer l'épisode 177 avec Salva Martin, VDV, autour des fausses croyances de l'investissement immobilier. Là aussi, on y apporte un regard neuf sur les idées erronées qui ont la dent dure. Tu m'en diras des nouvelles. Voilà, c'est tout pour aujourd'hui. J'espère que cet épisode t'a plu. Fais-toi un investisseur un peu mieux informé. Si c'est le cas, n'hésite pas à partager ce podcast avec ton entourage et à lui mettre une évaluation 5 étoiles sur Apple Podcasts ou Podchaser. Ça permet de le faire monter dans les classements et de me donner la motivation pour t'offrir toujours le meilleur contenu. Voilà, merci beaucoup encore pour ton soutien et une très bonne fin de semaine à toi. Ciao.